Hello, stress management students. Welcome to week 11 of this semester, and this is the last week for your stress management class. So be sure and finish strong, and be sure that you submit all items by the due date. I have a short window of time after the last day of class to get grades in. That's a school requirement. So my ability to take late assignments or allow for late exams is more limited right now. So finish strong, stay on top of things in this class for just this last week. Also wanted to give you a reminder that your final exam that is posted in this module is only covering the new information. So the lectures related to stress-prone personality, stress-resistant personalities, and then also this week you've got a couple of lectures posted. One is on boundaries and the other one is on assertiveness. So just that new information will appear on your final exam. And the good news is you can use PowerPoints, notes, and lecture videos. So hopefully that helps a lot. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started on this particular lecture. The topic will be boundaries. And, one thing I wanted to mention is that I did post a couple of, they're pretty short, YouTubes, between 5 and 10 minutes long, each one of them. And the first one that's posted, 5 Ways to Teach People How to Treat Us Properly, that particular YouTube is related to boundary setting, and it's good. So take a look at that. The second one, How to Be More Assertive, I wanted to explain. I don't really know what the qualifications are of the person who did this particular YouTube, but I did think that it was very good. Um, it's his channel, I think, is dedicated more so to male viewers, um, but what he's talking about really applies across the board. But he has some really good examples in that YouTube of situations where we need to learn to speak up, be more assertive, and establish some new boundaries. So again, I would encourage you to watch both of these. They really, again, they aren't very long. So go for it. Okay, so moving along to boundaries. And with boundaries, I think maybe the easiest way to think about boundaries is this. Uh, they're the way in which we teach other people how to treat us. And you guys, whether it's conscious or not, you're doing that all the time. Um, you know, it depends on what we allow. So, it's the boundaries are the way that we communicate to others what is okay and what is not okay with us. We're communicating our yeses and our nos to others. And in doing that, we are teaching them how to treat us. So this is really an excellent topic. Now, something that I left off with last week at the end of that second lecture on stress resistant personalities was with identifying what's considered to be the bottom line defense when it comes to stress management. That bottom line defense, again, is considered to be self esteem. And the connection I made at the end of that second video last week was this idea that I really felt like people who have a more solid or stable sense of self esteem probably are willing to speak up more so on behalf of themselves. And what I'm talking about here is they're willing to be assertive and establish those boundaries. I think something that can sometimes be helpful to recognize is what are considered to be components of high self-esteem. And this is based on some research that has been done in this area of self-esteem. And what they've identified is that individuals who tend to have higher self-esteem, well, first of all, they really do value their uniqueness. They appreciate who they are. And when you value your uniqueness, you don't feel compelled to change who you are to please others. Okay, people with high self-esteem uh, tend to have role models and tend to value those role models. And I always like to mention that role models can come in all shapes and forms. We sometimes think about just the more typical role models, like, um, well, it could be parents, our elders, teachers, um, coaches, but I think role models, wow, it can be a number of different types of people that show up in your life. And they may be there for long periods of time, but it could also be, someone that you've known for a shorter period of time. So having those role models seems to be really important in terms of cultivating self-esteem. Also, people with higher self-esteem tend to feel as if they're more connected and they value connection. And that's related to getting your connection needs met. So, how that's going to look, well, it's going to be different per individual. Um, but feeling connected is a part of self esteem. People with higher self esteem tend to be able to take those calculated risks. And that the calculated risk taker is type R personality. They tend to be more stress resistant. So that's a tie in there. And people who have higher levels of self esteem tend to have this sense of being empowered. And this particular concept is really going to come into this week's lectures. How at times we may not feel as empowered, why that might be occurring, and also what we can do to help ourselves feel more empowered or more in control of our lives, more like we're in the driver's seat of our lives. And something I also left off with last week, but I just wanted to mention it again. We're constantly feeding our self-esteem, and it can happen in a number of ways. We're feeding it through our choices and how we behave, how we speak, how we think. Um, and I think this is kind of a cool way, it's a cool thing to really think about. And this just kind of is making that simple. If we could adopt these three practices, if we could, all of us, consistently behave as if we really care about ourselves. So, just setting that as an intention, I think that's pretty powerful. What if we consistently spoke, or it could also be thinking as if we cared about ourselves? And then this third piece, what if we truly created boundaries that demonstrated that you actually care about yourself? Now, the reason I like this idea is because it, I don't even know it's possible, but do know it can be incredibly difficult to just sit down and go, okay, I'm going to change the way I feel about myself. It's pretty hard to change feelings, but how we can um, sometimes help feelings grow and change is by adjusting the way we behave, the way we speak, what we do. And so to bolster or to encourage better self-esteem, doing these three things can be pretty powerful. And I could see taking this and turning it into a really cool project of sorts for ourselves. For example, on Monday, maybe you set your goal here. As today is Monday, on Mondays, my goal is to consistently behave as if I care about myself, and really check yourself as you walk through the day. Maybe on Tuesdays, this is the goal, consistently speak as if you care about yourself. So you could turn this into something kind of a neat project. And I like this quote, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Okay, so I really like this particular saying. You teach people how to treat you by what you allow, what you stop, and what you reinforce. So I think just at the beginning of this section on boundaries, it is really cool to think about, okay, what am I allowing or accepting? What am I stopping? And what could I be reinforcing? And really looking at how that reinforcement happens. Sometimes we reinforce things by doing absolutely nothing. Other times we can reinforce things by saying thank you or I appreciate that. So the idea is with reinforcement, we want to reinforce the things that we actually want. And maybe that happens by saying, I really appreciate that you thought of me, or thank you so much for being so respectful. That's reinforcement, and also really beginning to look at, are you perhaps reinforcing some things that you don't like or that you don't want? All right, so the author of the text that I want to use in this class, this is something that was pointed out, that especially in our society today, they feel like one of the biggest problems when it comes to managing stress is related to personal boundaries. Being able to set effective ones, being consistent with those boundaries, which is going to involve also being able to speak up on behalf of yourself. And, I look at, one area where I can see how things have really shifted, and that this issue is much more difficult in our society these days, is when it comes to the use of technology. Once upon a time, um, the only form or the only way to communicate was maybe via phone call or in person. And these days, it's become more and more possible to just pop in at any time of the day on our friends or on family members. And so this is, I think, bringing up maybe a really good first example of boundaries. You might begin to think about what type of boundaries do you set with regard to communication, and especially communication um, that involves the use of your cell phone. And how are those boundaries or those guidelines or those rules, how are they working for you? Um, we want to establish boundaries that help preserve our peace of mind, help preserve the quality of our life, and demonstrate that we respect ourselves and that we care about ourselves. So, with that cell phone boundary, if I'm um, allowing other people to text or call at all hours of the night, what that might be saying is that I don't respect myself in some ways. In other words, I don't respect my needs for sleep or my needs for time of quiet. It could be a number of things. So, you could start thinking about your boundaries, your current boundaries, and the technology that you use. These are boundaries that it's pretty easy. Um, it can be easy to just kind of blow right through these unless you're clear on, unless you're being clear with others on what you truly want. Okay, so this is my stuff actually. Now, these are my ideas, and so you can take them for what you feel like they're worth. But I really do think there are two kind of distinctly different types of boundaries that we set. Um, some of the boundaries that we set, I look at them as parenting ourselves. And it says we establish boundaries regarding our own choices and behaviors. So, these parenting type boundaries are those guidelines that we give to ourselves. It could be what we're going to allow ourselves to eat. Are we going to set a boundary in terms of screen time? Are we setting rules with ourselves about how often um, we're going out and about? Are we setting guidelines with regard to how late we're allowing ourselves to stay out? So, these are the rules that, when we're growing up, when we're young, our parents kind of take care of these for us. They're telling us what the yeses and the nos are, and, once we are, in adulthood, we have to take over that role of parenting ourselves and learn to be good parents. If we are not good parents for ourselves, if we aren't setting those guidelines or those boundaries, or rules with ourselves, we're going to experience a lot of stress. And again, this boundary setting is very connected to the amount of stress that we're going to experience. So, if I'm not establishing good boundaries with regard to study time, actually forcing myself to sit down and these are the hours I study, and if I can't get myself to do that, there are going to be consequences, and usually the consequences aren't very good. And then this second type, or this second area of boundaries, is the area that most of the gets most of the tension. It's the interpersonal boundaries, the boundaries and the rules that we're establishing with regard to friends, family. It could be a partner, it could be our kids. Um, so, and these boundaries are the ones that are teaching others how to treat us. They're telling others what we're willing to accept and what we're not willing to accept. So I think something that can be a good place to begin is understanding what can happen when we are not setting effective boundaries, or when maybe we just aren't setting any boundaries at all. These are some of the feelings that are associated with a lack of boundaries. Feeling violated, stepped on, stepped over, disregarded, discounted, unseen, unheard, neglected, feeling powerless, feeling used, feeling at other people's disposal, feeling disrespected, feeling taken for granted. And then, this also, it's not establishing healthy boundaries, definitely, if you're being abused in some way. So, what I'd like you all to begin thinking about is there any area of your life, or any aspect of your life, are you feeling any of these that are listed here? And what comes up an awful lot in stress management, sometimes it shows up on anger logs, sometimes the worry logs, or even that ABCDE, is that these feelings are popping up. And of course, they're associated with stress. And so, kind of um, that root cause might be, hey, I am not establishing some important boundaries for myself. So, once again, if I'm not doing that, if I'm not articulating in a real clear way what my rules are, it's going to be a prescription for stress. And it's probably going to be a prescription for ongoing stress because what you allow, you encourage. Okay, so encouraging is very similar to reinforcing. So what I'm allowing, I'm kind of encouraging and reinforcing. So this is something that I found online. I have no clue who Robert Bernay is, but I thought this was so good. It says the purpose of having boundaries is to protect and take care of ourselves. We need to be able to tell other people when they are acting in ways that are not acceptable to us. A first step is starting to know that we have a right to protect and defend ourselves. That we have not only the right, but the duty to take responsibility for how we allow others to treat us. I love this attitude because it kind of puts the ball in my court. It's my responsibility. And that actually is a really good thing because that means I can do something about it. Sometimes in this section, what can come up is this idea of, do I actually need to? Do I really need to express that? Shouldn't it just be common sense? And I'm not sure if I've mentioned this before in this class, but it's not really safe to assume that we all have the same type of common sense. It's also not fair to assume that others should just be able to read our minds. So, yeah, especially if we're not getting what we want, it's really important to speak up, even if we think that it should just be common sense. So, here are some ways that we can use boundaries or that we should be using boundaries when it comes to what our wants and our needs. With boundaries, what we want to be doing is clearly communicating what those wants and needs are. And also at the same time, we have to recognize that we might get turned down, but it is indeed okay to ask. So, in other words, it is perfectly okay for me to speak up and ask for what I really want and need. It makes the situation much clearer and it gives the other person an opportunity to then maybe adjust their behavior or make changes in some way. They also will have the opportunity to respond. They may agree and adjust. They could say no. And to me, that is also really empowering. If I've spoken up, I'm going to get information. And if they end up saying no, I can't do that, well then I know I have more information and I can adjust my decisions, my actions, how I choose to spend my time, etc. from that point on. I now know. And I've already mentioned this, do not assume that others are mind readers or that it should just be common sense. It is also really key. You have to understand what your needs are. And also with boundaries, the other end of it is people are going to be either directly or indirectly asking you for things. And kind of the other end of this boundary is we have to have the courage to say yes and no. And you might, check in with yourself right now and just ask, are one of those words easier or more difficult for me to say? And I know it could be either word. Some people, believe it or not, are really good at saying no, but they have a harder time saying yes to things and yes to other people. Some of us are probably great yes people. We'll say yes all day long to maybe anything that anyone asks of us. And maybe a, a good percentage of the time, what we're really feeling is no. So this coming to understand, to truly understand what your needs are, and then having the courage to say yes or no is a part of this area of boundaries. And then also, this is a courage thing, being consistent with the no. Because if I say no on one day to someone, and then the next day I go, okay, well, I'm sending really inconsistent messages. I'm also letting the other person know that the strength of my boundaries, it's, it's not very strong. You can get me to change my mind. So, okay. Boundaries are also a way that respect is communicated. Um, So, again, we're looking at both sides of the boundary setting experience here. The first the first point here, it says respect for others, not taking advantage of their kindness or generosity. So, one mark of a healthy relationship is that I am going to have respect for the boundaries that others are establishing with me. I'm not going to try to take advantage of them. I'm not going to walk all over them. I'm going to demonstrate that I respect them and that that I understand that their wants and needs are equally important. Now, this self-respect, not giving too much in hopes that someone will like you. Now, this can sometimes be a difficult one. I don't think any of us really would want to announce that I do these things because I'm just hoping someone else will like me. Because I think that can sometimes seem really insecure. Not, but I guess I come from the perspective that most of us have insecurities. And, it can be tempting to do these types of things. Um, However, when we're giving up our own needs to satisfy someone else's, maybe with the hope that they'll actually like us or like us more, we're not really respecting ourselves. And then not allowing someone to take advantage of your kindness or generosity, learning to say no. So this is the connection between self-respect for others, and boundary setting. And then another aspect of boundaries is really related to preserving our own self-identity. So self-identity is, if we have a strong sense of self-identity, we know who we are, we know what we enjoy, we know what we value, we know how we're feeling, we know what we believe, we're in touch with our opinions. And if we're setting effective boundaries in relationships, we're able to preserve that sense of self, that we are a whole, complete person, and that we do, in fact, know who we are. If we're not able to do that in relationships, we are somewhat letting go of who we really are and allowing others maybe to kind of take over and define us. So this one begins with this ability to maintain your personal values despite what others may want. So maybe someone is asking you to do something that you don't agree with. Um, and that is going to be probably related to your values, your sense of integrity, etc. So, if it's in violation of what our own personal values are, we need to be able to establish a boundary. And in this case, it would be saying, no, I don't want to do that. Okay, so the ability to stay focused upon your own growth when involved with others, and that is versus just kind of forgetting about yourself, the interests you've had, the unique friendships that you have that are separate, from whatever relationship we may be talking about here. So, are you able to establish boundaries that honor your own personal growth? When you're involved, and this is when I say relationships, I really mean kind of any type of relationship, friendship, family relationship, partner relationship. When you're in relationships, are you able to trust your own decisions? Do you honor what you feel inside is the correct decision to make? Or do you allow other people to make your decisions for you? Um, so establishing that clear boundary that says, hey, I want to make my own decisions and I feel very competent in doing that. And the same thing also applies here with regard to your truth, defining your truth. And it could be your truth about a lot of things. I think one just pretty basic example is being able to define your truth with regard to how you're feeling. Understanding and acknowledging how you feel versus letting other people tell you how you feel. So I'm hoping that a lot of this resonates. That um, you have seen it, maybe you've experienced it, and that you really understand kind of what I'm talking about here. This is something else that I found online that I really liked, and I like to bring it into class. It's called the Boundary Bill of Rights. You have the right to be treated with respect. So you have the right. You have the right to say no, and I love the second part, without feeling guilty. You have the right to make a mistake. You have the right to ask for what you want and need. You have the right to express your feelings and opinions, and I would also want to qualify that and say appropriately. You have the right to change your mind. You have the right to feel good about yourself no matter what others say. And you have the right to act in your own best interest if you don't violate others in the process. So I think, to me, when I look at this, when I see it, it just speaks empowerment. If we are able uh, to speak up and establish boundaries, ask for the things that we need, it feels like this area. It feels like to me when I read this, it just feels like strength. You know, it feels like, wow, I am actually the author of my own life. I get to do this. I really do. Okay, so some benefits of healthy boundaries, and I've been talking about this, feeling more empowered versus feeling like a victim. There's going to be a lot less drama in life and decreased sense of stress. So, yes, this is very much so a stress management strategy. Improved self confidence, improved self esteem. You're going to increase the probability of you actually reaching your goals because you'll be able to establish these boundaries that help you stay on a clear path versus letting others come in and maybe to some degree take you off course. You're definitely going to be increasing your opportunity for happiness, and your relationships in general will be much healthier. They're going to be a lot more honest too, and much more meaningful. So, What I'd like you to think about is this question: is there a specific boundary that you might like to create or strengthen or maybe recraft or once again express? And, thinking about those feelings that sometimes occur if we're not doing that, that's, I think, a way to determine if there is a boundary that we might want to work on. Am I feeling walked on? Am I not feeling appreciated in some area of my life? So, maybe going to that situation and deciding, is this a situation that I would like to work with in terms of establishing a better boundary, a new boundary, or maybe strengthening the one I have? Now, in the next lecture, we're talking about assertiveness, which is that skill, how to articulate it, how to actually speak it. So it would be nice if going into the second lecture, if you had a situation in mind. I also realize it's possible that for some of you, all of your boundaries are maybe really established in this pretty perfect way. I just know that, this is an area that most of us, we have to really practice a lot in this area. And I think for most of our lives, we're still working on it, so consider that. And this is just a little bit of an expansion on that question. What is the one thing that you could do now to create healthier boundaries in your relationships? Is there something you want to ask for? Is there a no that you want to express? What do you need to express that will demonstrate greater self-respect? So think about these things and maybe come up with a few ideas, and bring those ideas with you to the second lecture on assertiveness. All right. Hope you have a fantastic remainder of your day, and I will talk to you soon.